For those of you who don't recognize my voice out there in the internet, it's me, Shana Nys Dambrot, art critic, art editor of the LA Weekly here in Los Angeles, etc. And I am so excited because I was invited by Carlos and Salomón to come in today and have this conversation with the artists in their two-person exhibition. And I have so many questions for both of you, Francesco and Emmett, even though we've known each other forever and we've just met. I have all kinds of questions, and I guess we have to start somewhere. So I'm gonna start with you, Francesco, just because I've known you so much longer than a few hours. Sorry. If you could just tell me more about what we're looking at. Like, I know this work spans like 20 years. I know it's rarely and maybe never really been shown. And maybe if you could just start by telling me a little bit about that, like your personal practice, that even the people who love you the most don't know anything about.
Yeah. Well, you know, number one, it's true, none of this work has been shown before. The idea of the equivalence is an idea that I have had now for a really long time, positioning the idea of synesthesia. And so all of the elements that are outside of the main composition are really seen as equivalents of the main composition from a different language, let's say. So it's sort of like a representation from a different angle. And in my mind, they're the same, or I want them to be the same, or at least the idea that there is a language, or it's different languages that can actually talk about one same thing and actually inform it even more.
And some of the things you were saying about working with the forms made me already excited to talk to Emmett. Hi, Emmett. Thank you for being so cool and patient over there. But I'm sure you know the things that you were listening to him. And when he starts talking about the energy fields of objects, the experience of them, you were mentioning, living with things over time and suddenly seeing them in a new way, the idea of putting them together and suddenly being in the presence of a third new thing or kind of experience. Because we're dealing with found objects, we're referencing land art and earthworks and brutalism and architecture and industry, we're referencing land use and resource scarcity. We've got really start with the most sort of apparent thing, which is your incredible relationship to materials.
I guess I started off as a person who wanted to make performance work very early days, and a lot of it was tied into ideas of labor. So how do you position yourself as an artist, I guess, morally? Like, how do you make yourself feel okay about, putting ideas out into the world and expecting to be compensated for that? So like when you're young, there's a lot of angst about that, right? How do you, because if you're coming from, say, a working class background where your parents do tangible things, how do you then,
being an artist of any kind is transgressive enough, much less a
Right.
conceptual or performative one.
Right. So a lot of early things that I did would be using simple materials that you could find from, the lumber yard or from the Home Depot, whatever. So it would be sand. So I would sit and count sand for a week. Things like this. So it's like, I kind of wanted to be a writer also. Never had the full discipline to do that. But I think that's one thing that's always gone through work is having the patience to sit with things and examine them and know when they're right to, to be stood up or to be like highlighted. I feel like this show is kind of an accumulation of 10 years of living in a new space, somewhere that you're totally alien to, but trying to somehow build a language through those things that you find and kind of find curiosity from, and how you reframe those to create a narrative about issues of work, migration, infrastructure. These are all things that I find personally very important, and especially here, where we're close to the border. There's many layers of that going on. Yeah.
And also we have such, pulling back, the entire American experiment's relationship to land use is contested at best. Okay.
Right.
But even for America, Los Angeles has really doubled down on this sort of nonstop cycle of destruction in the name of development, right? And the sky crane and the palm tree are sort of fighting. I almost feel like we're ready to replace the palm tree on our logo with a sky crane at this point. It's so ridiculous. Is your intention when you go to recombine and represent these materials? So you've got these things, how do you know what to do with them?
I guess they're all statements on consumption in my mind. So if you can find something that's discarded, that has gone through an industrial process, you can right away, it's a signifier, right? You know what that was. So the spiral piece, the glass on top is from an old television screen. It's when they used to paint a kind of a silver on the back. So it would basically be a back projection. It was before LED screens came about. Right. So that piece of glass, which was originally sand, went through that process. It was a vessel for images to be projected. Then it was broken. It was on Alameda downtown. I picked it up and sat with it for, I think, 5 years. And at some point, then you kind of, it's like decided intention of things and intention of I guess where your politics sit. So how do I feel about the use of raw materials? How do I feel about the state of affairs downtown LA, close to Skid Row, close to even where we work as printmakers, all this kind of stuff, which we take for granted, right? At some point, you have to throw something back at that, whether it's joy or repulsion. So it's, the decision making is political, I guess.
But I think that one of the main things, and as a parenthesis, I really like Emmett's work. I'm not over the hump. The hump is when you actually consider it as a ritual, as a secular ritual, which would be fantastic if everybody would come here and do an homage to the objects as ritual, because I do believe that for me would be a response to a lot of our ills. But said that, the landscape drawings is really, to some extent, is sort of revisit the idea of the artists that used to go out there and paint landscapes. The Impressionists, or even before the Impressionists, the Romantics. And I think that the idea was to re-understand that.
And or every other generation has to kind of rediscover, as you say, re-own or reclaim, the landscape. And that, there's no better way to make sure that your quality of attention is up to par than to be drawing it, because in drawing it, you have to be looking at it with a deeper kind of attention than just going for a walk or whatever with your earpods in, which is still amazing. But in order to really commune with it, you need to do some kind of action. So,
right.
I feel like it's ritual adjacent.
I don't think I noticed before, but all of the ones in this part of the show are without any sort of man-made structure, right? Just from sitting here looking, I think it's all. There's no mark of man. So the one that I responded to in Francesco's studio was this piece, which was
the only urban one.
The work from Cambodia, which is the most recent, right?
Urban's the wrong word, but architectural.
So it's basically about ruins. It's a physical ruin being taken back by nature. So I responded to that as nature as political or as politics. The issues of resources, of migration, displacement, all of these things that I'm interested in. That work kind of stood out to me, and we positioned it with a piece of mine, which is a pretty simple found object from a quarry in Ireland, where my family are from. It's in the southeast, close to Kilkenny. And so Kilkenny is a famous city. It's called the Marble City. In the 1700s or maybe 1600s, they were building a lot of the streets were paved with this particular stone. It's carboniferous limestone. And so it's from a period of time where most of Europe was underwater. And so it's a pure black stone, and all the white shapes in that stone are fossils of early sea creatures. So the piece on the wall here is basically 330 million year old fossils. And so I kind of like that idea as a very pure found object, and maybe it's a little hokey to kind of like frame some fossils and show them, but there's also something about that piece that looks to me like there's something like about the abyss to it, which I also get from Francesco's piece, even though it's a bit more like illustrative. But like if we're talking about time scales and our position in those time scales, I kind of feel like those two like span a nice period. Mm-hmm. You know, it's both within our lifetime and prehistory and looking forward.
But the reality is, within the context of what you actually do, that's a stone that an entire city was built from. So not only what it is, in the sense of like it would be powerful enough to contemplate the timeline of biological life on Earth in a natural history museum setting, and they're crazy looking, right? And that would be enough. But then to know that it's from where you are, a thing that the place that your people and you come from literally came here from there, and that it's known for taking these quarries of natural history treasure, because that was the stuff that they needed to build a city, and that was the stuff they had.
But it's also funny because they call it the Marble City.
And it's not.
But it's
marble.
limestone, so it's this idea of like aspiration, right? You know, and during that period when, you know,
they can't call themselves the
expansion,
fossil city.
Well, the limestone city is like not too glamorous. It's not like neoclassical, right? Yeah. So that to me was really funny.
Of course you're interested in what a city is made of, if that's the city you're from, even more so. You know, okay, it's because where I live now used to be underwater. Well, how do we think we got mountains and canyons? And so there's a lot of these big ideas that you guys actually kind of really share, even though your work is so manifestly different materially and aesthetically. It's really interesting. Yeah. And then, so the video piece, which is the only not paleotech, but the video itself actually kind of makes what you're going for a little bit more explicit, almost has like a manifesto quality to it. And again, it's this region. So am I right in assuming that making the video was one more way of getting to know where you are from now, as well as you make it much more explicit that there's a political context for what you're doing in the video?
Yeah, so I guess I started making film and video when I was doing these performances, so it would, you know, I was the subject. It was, you know, looking at people like Bruce Nauman, obviously, like the work of Douglas Hubler, those, you know, heavyweight conceptual artists. But it was always like the white male-dominated history of minimal art, conceptual art. So I guess I kind of came away from that, and then you end up, well, I found I ended up in a place where the white male was not important, right? So we're in a city that has a very rich history without white people. It has current problems of, you know, white dominance. And so I guess the video for me, video work was, originally it was always a way of documenting something, whether that was a performance or a written statement or an action. And since then, as I've moved forward with, I guess, where I am physically, and also like where my work has shifted to physically, it's become a way of documenting political histories that are overlooked. So this video piece is really about the Los Angeles aqueduct, which takes water around 240 miles from the north on the eastern Sierras. It basically displaces it from there via gravity. You know, this is a pipeline that was made in 1905, I think. William Mulholland, you know, the city's grandfather.
Chinatown is a documentary, y'all.
Right. So
Retire reminding people of that.
So you know, that to me is like a really overtly political act to divert water from somewhere to basically create a city that maybe shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Shouldn't even be here in the first
place.
place.
Yeah, because it's not sustainable and it's not natural.
Yeah.
And yet here we are.
That idea of theft and the layering of that, I think, is so important, because what I know about that history is, for example, when the city decided we needed the water for our city's existence, they quote unquote stole it from like the ranchers, right? So here's all the ranchers up there freaking out about the city stealing their water with less than zero awareness of the fact that they themselves stole it from the indigenous populations who had been the stewards of it for thousands of years before. They just showed up and wanted it for themselves. And so you've got this crazy fulcrum of like they recognize injustice done to them, but in no way their perpetration of the exact same injustice only a few generations earlier.
Yep.
And that is the current moment in conversation about water conservation in Los Angeles.
Yeah, and land use, gentrification, you know.
Yeah.
The situation where we can have basically a city of like 40 to 50,000 homeless people who are right here in a contained, you know, city of Skid Row, like for so long. Like, how is that acceptable?
Well, I think we're all starting to wake up to the fact that it's a choice, not a failure, of whatever policies are being enacted by our leaders, right? And, you know, look, I'm a white person. My father's a white man. He's lovely. I'm not just like a random hater. But what you said about, you know, who benefits and who's been making these decisions about how these resources are going to be allocated and valued and contained and hoarded and whatever, who's been making those decisions this whole time. And it's absolutely time for that to be one of many, many things that change about who holds the reins of power in the city country world. And it's so interesting to me that you are tapping into previous generations of land art and post-brutalist minimalism, that neither one of which were interested in that message, and to bend that aesthetic and those parts of art history into this message that's urgent for today is really brilliant. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that's, and you said this too, like there's stuff in art history for you if you want it, you know? And is it, oh, someone's done this before? No, it's, I'm gonna add my voice to the continuum of this being done, which is incredibly powerful. So I see both of you doing that in different ways, but not really even entirely different. I mean, you're both so tied to the land and the past life of objects and things like that. So I don't know if Salomón is still here. If you can hear me, Salomón, bravo on pairing these two artists together. I think, oh, there you are, you can hear me. You can hear me saying nice things about him. No, but it's a really brilliant pairing. I mean, this conversation today has been about confluence, not contrast, which I think was a lovely surprise.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.